Welcome to this 100 YouTube subscriber live celebration of Tales from SYL Ranch, the BitChute channel where everyone is entitled to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone. Yes, here we are for a live celebration. Let me have a look and see how many viewers I have right now. At the moment, it looks like I have none. And it says I've got bad resolution. But hey, YouTube tends to lie about these things inside of their control panel. So if you're seeing me and it's not 5x5, if I'm getting dropped frames, please let me know. I did do a test of this earlier today, so hopefully there won't be any dropped frames. And I want to thank anybody. Here we got one viewer. Hi. I want to thank everyone for giving me these 100 subscribers. It's not a gigantic milestone, I admit, but it is a milestone nevertheless, because it gave me access to a YouTube personalized URL, which I've been wanting for a long time, so that I can have it for marketing reasons. YouTube URL is now youtube.com/c/Tales from SYL Ranch. Although, to be honest, I'm still generally pushing this show over on the BitChute side of things, because I tend to get anywhere from 4 to 10 times the number of views on BitChute than I do on YouTube. In fact, let me check my most recent video. The Babelfish Syndrome currently has, I see, 22 video views over on YouTube, while on BitChute it has 250. So again, we're dealing with 10 times the amount of views, with I might add somewhat more than twice the number, half the number of subscribers as I have on YouTube. So clearly we're doing rather nicely in that respect. So, you might want to bring your booze or any psychotropic substances that are legal in your area. I can't celebrate with booze because, in the immortal words of Wilford Brimley, I got the diabetes. So instead, I have as often is the case, my white grape Hy-Vee brand naturally flavored sparkling water beverage. And no, Hy-Vee has not paid me anything for that, but feel free, because I have that stuff by my side every time I do a live stream, and in fact use it sometimes before and after. Hi, Captain Jesse, how are you doing today? Glad to see you here for my 100 subscriber live stream celebration. Anyway, I can't show you this very well, because as it happens, the label is green, and so it's the same color as my green screen. You see right through it. But since I can't use wine or any other kind of alcoholic beverage, and psychotropic substances are not legal in Nebraska, I'm going to take this and put it into a wine glass. And here we go. And with any luck, I will not be spilling this all over my desk, because right now on my desk I have a nice little holder for this that comes with this desk. This is a big-ass computer desk, and I have a nice holder that keeps me, it makes it available for just drop my drink into. So hopefully I won't be doing anything that spills this thing during the middle of the stream. So bottoms up. Thank you very much. I'll be drinking from this liberally, as people know who have watched me on live streams before. Captain Jesse, sorry to hear that you don't have any work. See, we got a second viewer in here. Hi. I tell you, in all honesty, today was the day that I had my hearing for my disability. So I'm waiting about a month to find out how that's going to turn out. We'll just have to see. I don't know yet, so we'll just have to see. But as I say, it is a 100 subscriber live stream celebration. I'm happy to have you 100 subscribers. Hope at least some of you will come in and have a look at me. Got a number of things on tap tonight. I'm going to talk about Facebook timeouts, because a good friend of mine and a longtime viewer had that happen to him. And while he wrote about it at some length, it's still worth probably bringing up some of the other stuff about it. Going to talk a little bit about Google and what they've been doing. What we now know for certain that they've been doing, although if you've been in my field for very long, you knew they were doing it. I had something come up on Twitter today about the concept of marriage at young ages, and how that falls under the zero aggression principle. So I'll talk about that as well to some extent. Talk about Jeffrey Epstein for at least a little bit. Maybe talk about some mass shootings. I'll also give some information because I've had questions about it, about some of the details of my show and what they mean and why I do it the way I do. So we will see how that goes along. I'm not going to start in on that stuff till I've got at least a few more viewers. Hopefully that individual who wanted to know about marriage will pop in. He said he would. So we'll see how it goes. And once again, congratulations having you guys help me out and giving me 100 subscribers. I'm actually, I think, at about 102 right now. So that keeps me nicely over the limit, and hopefully that will just continue to go up. Hopefully, too, it will translate into higher views, although I'm not holding my breath on that. I made a video about this. The algorithm is watching you. And I think that there's every reason to believe that YouTube's algorithms are, if not actively, at least passively, pushing down my videos and not making it available in terms of people's sidebars as suggested videos. So I think that's probably happening as well. But maybe now that we know what they're doing, and we know for a fact that one of their bigwigs lied under oath about what they're doing, that may cause the federal government to become involved. That's not my favorite way to solve this at all. I think the federal government sticking its nose into the IT tent is probably a bad thing in general. But fact is, big tech have kind of brought it on themselves. So we may well have some government intervention on that. We'll see. The problem with the government people is they're lawyers. They don't understand anything about, technology, really. I once tried to get the attention of my then Senator, Joni Ernst from Iowa, when I was living in Iowa, because I could see that they were just fracking that Equifax investigation. If you remember, Equifax had done some really stupid technical things that exposed a whole bunch of their database out to the public. And I could tell they were screwing it up, just screwing it up like mad. So I talked to my, I wrote up a very professional report. I'm good at that. I did, technical reports all the time when I was in IT for 40 years. And I wrote up a very good technical report. I got a couple of her flunkies to take a meeting with me and handed it off to them, and they did what flunkies always do, which was get all excited about it for you while you're there, and well, it's probably not meaningful. And it went nowhere because my my suggestion to them was that they needed to have somebody like me, not necessarily me, but like me, who was knowledgeable about this stuff, give them some initial questions to ask. But then they should have an earpiece that was going back to somebody who was monitoring all of these, hearings, so that they could feed the senators the appropriate follow-up questions. Because otherwise these guys, they were just looking at it from a legal perspective as opposed to a technical perspective. And from a technical perspective, Equifax had just screwed everything up in sight. But that never went anywhere. I didn't expect it to. These people, they're lawyers. They can't be told what's going on. So, Captain Jesse asking, what is new, Bill? Well, not a lot, to be perfectly honest. Aside from, now doing, instead of live streams all the time, I'm doing shorter, generally 12 to 15 minutes, sometimes as long as 20-minute videos, because I've learned that if you make your videos longer than about 12 minutes, you're going to lose your audience. And if you can't get it down to under 20 minutes, you're probably in serious trouble. I have, on a couple of occasions, if you watch my videos, kind of allowed myself to get angry about things that really ticked me off. They get a lot of views, unfortunately, and I understand that. Outrage always gets views. So I'm of two minds about that, because, there are times when I get legitimately upset about something. Anytime you see me get really pissed off, that's real. I don't act. By the same token, I try to sort of be the adult in the room. So I don't know. You probably won't see me get all that angry. Like, for example, the reason that I have the American flag flying upside down in my lower corner there is intentional. Again, Jesse asks, did I get my disability payment yet? No. Today, in fact, was my disability hearing that I had with my attorney. That went reasonably well. It was a little different than I expected. The judge was from Washington someplace, not Washington, D.C., Washington State, and appeared via teleconference. I could certainly prove that I cannot do the IT work that I'd been doing. There was also a vocational counselor on, and she named out 2 or 3 low-level things that probably also wouldn't work for me for physical reasons. But my attorney just asked the question, what would be the impact of his being unable to do this 15% of the time, which is a reasonable amount of time to think of, considering that, various conditions. So he told me basically it's going to hinge on whether the judge takes into account and believes that I would be impaired at least 15% of the time. So we'll see. I don't know. I don't know how to judge what the judge thinks about that, so we'll find out. But I did have that today. Got to go down to the federal building here in Lincoln, Nebraska, and man, they have all kinds of fun security. They tell me take out everything out of my pockets when I first walked in, and then they had to do it again when I checked in, and they ran a wand over me to make sure that I wasn't carrying any concealed weapons or anything like that. What is for 15% reduced work? Well, if I couldn't show up or could not do the job 15% of the time. And that's reasonable with me. Between my lower back problems and my other issues that have more to do with mental health, it's a reasonable thing to ask. I mean, 15% of the time, reality is that I have not taken a vacation since 2004, and that's because I have always used up my vacation time and my sick time and any PTO time, depending on the company it is. I've used it all up being absent from work because of physical and or because I have an anxiety disorder that's very severe. And between that and everything else, I've always used up my time. In fact, sometimes I've used up more than I had. And so I had to take reduced pay because of that. So being absent 15% of the time is a reasonable thing to ask. So 15% reduced work just means, would I be able to do the things that the person who was the vocational counselor suggested if I was gone or unable to do those things for 15% of the time. So we're up to 5 viewers. Hi, you guys. Thanks for being here for this YouTube 100 YouTube subscriber live stream celebration here on Tales from SYL Ranch. Hope I can keep your attention. I guess I'll start in with a couple of things that I do have prepared. You may feel free to ask any comments, give me questions, nasty remarks. I'm happy to respond over to you. But I do want to talk a little bit about Facebook timeouts. I need to TP system ATS. I'm not sure what you're meaning by that, Captain Jesse, but congratulations on the 100 subscribers. Thank you, Dalton. I appreciate it very much. As I said, I can't use any alcohol because, as in the immortal words of Wilford Brimley, I got the diabetes. So instead, I am using the Hy-Vee brand white grape naturally flavored sparkling spring water beverage, which is basically flavored water with some CO2 thrown in. And by the way, Hy-Vee, if you want to actually support me financially as some kind of sponsor, feel free to get with me because I always have these things with me when I'm doing stuff. Oh, it's American Truck Simulator. Yeah, well, that might work. I might be able to do American Truck Simulator, not much of anything else. So instead, I have in my wine glass that's sparkling water, and that's what I'll be drinking from time to time because I tend to get cotton mouth real easily when I'm doing these. So, Facebook. give me a second here because I'm probably going to pull this out as a clip. And I found that when I do that, I need to leave some time for fade in and stuff like that. And by the way, this is what I actually do right before anytime I do any recording or when I go live or anything like that. I always say to myself, smiles, everyone, smiles. So my old friend, Marshall Presnell, who was the first subscriber to this channel and is also something of a YouTube kingmaker, he was put in a Facebook timeout for sharing a trailer to the film The Hunt. Now, if you don't know what this film's premise is, it's that elite liberals are kidnapping Trump supporters and transporting them to a hunting preserve where they then hunt them down and kill them. Marshall had the temerity to suggest that this was a bad movie to ever make and certainly horrific in the current political climate. And Facebook immediately took that post and put him in a timeout. Now, Marshall has now written a very excellent note on his Facebook describing the technical issues in very great detail. I invite you to look at it. It gives a great technical account of the process. It's called Doing Hard Time in the Facebook Jail, and you will see a link to that in my description box below. However, there is something rather insidious and frankly downright evil at play with regards to Facebook's timeout system that merits some discussion. You see, Facebook's business model is to provide extremely targeted advertising. Now, I see this on myself on my Facebook page that I maintain for this channel. Which, by the way, feel free to follow that page and like it. There is a link to it below. I also have a group associated with that page called the Close Personal Friends of Tales from SYL Ranch. Feel free to join that group if you like. Captain Jesse says, YouTube some days is not much better than Facebook. Oh, I'm going to get into Google. And Google, of course, Google, YouTube, same thing, really. But when you have a channel or business page like mine, Facebook makes it very, very easy to make targeted advertising, very targeted advertising for very specific groups, for very specific lengths of time, for a fee, of course. And some of the fees aren't bad. If you add to this, my experience in IT for 40 years, that in a business of any small, beyond a small size, the company is essentially driven by the marketing department. One of the things you learn early on in a company of any size is if you need to do desktop support, for example, the first people on your list, regardless of how bad, you might have something that's infecting the whole company, but regardless, if your CEO, upper management has a problem with their computer, they go to the top of the list, everybody else is at the bottom. And right below the management is marketing. They drive the companies most of the time. And of course, that wouldn't happen if marketing didn't produce some pretty tangible, specific results. And so Facebook's algorithms, well, they gather data on everyone based on their posts, given the sheer computing scale, and it is enormous. It categorizes us all in every way imaginable, including our politics. So I'm quite certain that Marshall Facebook knows Marshall is a constitutional-leaning conservative, and that I'm a constitutional-leaning libertarian. And we know now from the American Psychological Association that the other part of Facebook's business model involves addicting users to a dopamine rush that occurs as a result of what's called rewards-based behavior. Now, this isn't just me talking. There is a great article from Psychology Today called Why We're All Addicted to Texts, Twitter, and Google. And there's a link to that below if you want to read it. But in general, to kind of summarize, whenever your posts are liked or given positive feedback, you get a mild dopamine rush in your brain that makes you feel good. And then you spend more time on Facebook or Twitter, they do the same thing, in expectation of receiving that same dopamine rush again. And this is a physical addiction. It actually causes people physical distress when they are deprived of use of the platform. So yes, Facebook and Twitter are employing the exact same methods as the worst sorts of drug dealers. Captain Jesse says Facebook only cares about money and how to make more money. Yeah, they do, but they care about other things more, and that's what I'm going to talk about here. So we also know from insider testimony that Facebook will censor based on leftist principles. It is nothing less than attempting to mold behavior in order to turn the public at large into leftists. So as a conservative or a libertarian, Marshall and I are people whose behavior needs to be molded from Facebook's perspective. And consequently, their algorithms are going to evaluate your posts and decide whether or not you need active moderation by putting you in a timeout. And this is all underpinned by this addiction to a dopamine rush that you will be missing during your timeout. So when you put in a timeout, basically you're discovering the limits to which you're allowed to behave. And you dare not overstep those limits. Again, you just dare not. Otherwise, the dopamine rush is going to be absent and you're going to feel very uncomfortable. Facebook and Twitter are just absolutely ruthless about this. And you must just simply toe the leftist line or be cut off from the source of your addiction. And to categorize this whole thing as evil would be the understatement of the century, frankly. And to be honest, I'm surprised that I've been allowed to go as far as I have on Facebook. And I assume this is because I have a channel page that's promoting a type of business, even though I can't afford it or not. But I'm at least a potential source of revenue. And I suspect that Facebook maybe gives me a little greater latitude to do certain things than they might somebody otherwise who is not really a potential source of immediate revenue in terms of giving them money for the marketing. So that is kind of what Facebook is doing. It's evil. My only suggestion always is get off of Facebook. Try to get off of Facebook and Twitter and wean yourself off of that dopamine addiction that you've got going on. Whether you know it or not, you almost certainly have it. The only reason I don't is because I have to be on YouTube and Twitter and Facebook. I kind of have to be. I'm on lots and lots and lots of social media, but Facebook and Twitter, Twitter in particular, absolutely key. When I market my videos on Twitter, I see my view counts jump instantly over on the BitChute side. It is a really good way to do marketing. So that's why I'm in it. But I don't think I have the same addiction because, particularly on Twitter, I am totally and completely clinical about it. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy engaging my viewers both on Facebook and Twitter. But you always have to remember, anytime I'm doing it, I consider these marketing platforms first and foremost, and that's what you should do. And so when I'm posting stuff up there, and if I'm interacting with you, I'm trying to do it in a way that's both honest, but at the same time, make myself look better, put myself in a good light, so that I'm not pushing you away. I'm pulling you in. Let's see. Captain Jesse says, if someone is not surfing Facebook, then Facebook is not stealing like from that person and brainwashing that person. Yeah, which is why I suggest getting off of it. Leave it completely. Go to places like MeWe, Minds, any of those places. I've mentioned it in another show. Probably time to go through and kind of do them one at a time. That show was very long, and looking back now, it's too long. They need to be about 12 minutes in length. So I should probably go back and revisit them, making individual videos about free speech alternatives. But there are different platforms where that addiction that is absolutely part of Facebook's business model is not occurring. And Captain Jesse says, whenever I go out, I do not turn on my data. Yeah, that's not a bad idea. For me, it's difficult for me to just get away from using my phone, and that's because after so many years in IT, Your phone just became indispensable. Everybody wants to get a hold of you all the time, 24/7, 365, and you just kind of can't get away with leaving your phone behind. So, partly I'm burned out after working 30 years in tech. I think that's partly true, but there are other factors involved that I don't really go into publicly for the most part. So, but that is what Facebook is doing, and Twitter. My only suggestion is to leave those platforms. They're certainly toxic otherwise. Did a video about it recently, my most previous video, called the Babelfish Effect. And it kind of goes through and describes how it is that we are so horrible to each other on Twitter and Facebook, and how that's actually kind of dangerous. Don't get into flame wars. Just be nice people. That's my general suggestion about that. And that was me holding for my transition time when I take that out as a clip. So we can also talk about Google. I probably won't pull that one out as a clip because that is a developing situation. We now know from insider testimony that Google executives lied to Congress. I don't remember if it was Congress or the Senate that they were lying to, but they lied to them about what they're doing under the hood. And we now have a whistleblower that has come forward who has leaked documents from Google that clearly show Google is attempting to manipulate particularly their search engine. I suspect they're manipulating all the rest of their products as well, with making sure that you don't see certain things when you do searches, that they do not come up for you. And it's intentional. They are trying to mold you. They are trying to change your behavior by not showing you things or by showing you specific things. They're just trying to change your behavior. And again, this is all from a leftist bent, and this is all because they really got freaked out when Donald Trump won the election and decided that they were going to do everything in their power to make sure that it didn't happen again. What about the politicians going to do about both the abuses of Facebook and Google? I don't know. It's not my first. It's never my first go-to to get government involved, because once government gets involved in one aspect of IT, they will get involved in another aspect and another aspect and another aspect, and pretty soon you're looking at IT that's controlled by government, and that's not good, because the fact that IT, and again 40 years in that field, I can tell you that the reason that we have more computing power in our pockets than it took to put man on the moon is because we didn't have government interference. We were just let go to do what we wanted to do. The engineers were let go to do what they wanted to do. People like me were let go to figure out solutions that those engineers came up with and how to implement them. If the federal government gets too involved in that, I think that's a very, very bad thing indeed. However, that said, Google, Facebook, Twitter, the big tech, they have all done this to themselves. It was a foregone conclusion that someone would come forward and, even looking at it from the outside, as I have for 40 years, I can see what they're doing. I don't know how they do it. The way that they do it is spelled out by this Google insider who came out on Project Veritas. Got to give props to Project Veritas. They do an extraordinary job of infiltrating and getting people to come out in public. Were it not for Project Veritas, we wouldn't know a lot of things. And I know people who really hate James O'Keefe as a journalist, but the fact is, at one time, this is the sort of thing that all journalists did. They infiltrated something in order to find out the truth. Well, now all they do is regurgitate somebody's line. These days they love spies. They love to regurgitate spies who have their own agendas. And as the secondary motto of my show always reads, nothing you see in the press is real. nothing. And so they just regurgitate stuff. They get things from unnamed sources, sources close to something or other. And when you can't get somebody to go on the record, just forget it. Whatever they say, it probably has no real weight. So my solution, frankly, to this, if I were, suggesting it to people in general, is don't use Google as a search engine. Use DuckDuckGo.com instead. DuckDuckGo.com is very, very good as a search engine. It's constantly evolving. A couple of years ago, I wouldn't have said use it. It's not quite there yet. Today, it is there yet. About the only thing that I resort to Google for is certain types of image searches, like if I'm looking for a background for my green screen that you see here. This is a little bit more of a generic one. However, I have to tell you, that Doctor Who scarf that you see over there, that came off of a Google image search. It was the right kind of resolution, and it worked out. But DuckDuckGo.com is really good. I also suggest that instead of using Chromium, or Chrome rather, you use the Brave web browser, both on your desktop and on your mobile device. And its default search engine is automatically set to DuckDuckGo.com. So switch to that, because they're not doing the tracking at all. They're not doing anything except providing you with search results based on whatever you enter into the search field. They're not trying to manipulate you that way. Cam just says, and CBS wonders why all new Star Trek since 2009 is mixed and split Star Trek fans' reaction over canon issues. Star Trek tried to push BS writing, only pissed off all traditional Star Trek fans. Yeah. I used that as an example too in the video, the Babelfish effect, because what you're looking at there is a split that comes down on cultural lines, I think. There was a time when our culture was relatively optimistic. I mean, even living through the Cold War as I did, it was relatively optimistic. We all worried, and there were times when it came very close, but we all worried about World War III. But the general expectation was that you'd do well for yourself, that you'd leave a better world for your children. And our culture has simply changed to nihilism. So I think where that split happens is in what people's expectations of culture are now. The people who were fans of Star Trek through 2005 through Star Trek Enterprise were part of a culture that had been hopeful. And so the people who made those shows knew how to make a hopeful future. By the time we got to 2009, well, God, it just turned into all movies were generic action movies, and not great ones, in as much as I have a problem with action movies that have CGI that allows us to see characters doing things that would kill them, like in Star Trek Into Darkness, when Kirk and McCoy jump off that cliff that is so far up. It doesn't matter how they hit that water. It was so far up that the water would have been like hitting concrete. And that's what you can do with CGI. There's another scene in there, and I've forgotten where. Kirk is sliding down a very steep incline, right, from a long distance down this incline. And in real life, if you did that and you hit the bottom, you'd shatter your knees, you'd shatter your legs, at best you'd wind up a paraplegic, but in most cases likely you'd just be dead. That sort of generic action where if you have the first idea about real life, that this is stuff that's just going to kill people, And then by 2017, with Star Trek Discovery, we had gone into a culture that was outright nihilistic. And so the writers of that show, having grown up in a nihilistic culture, simply cannot imagine a hopeful future like Gene Roddenberry wanted to portray in Star Trek. And so we got what we got. I'm worried about what they're going to do with Star Trek Picard. I'm very worried now. There was a time at which I said, if we could get that Viacom merger between CBS and Viacom back, That would be a good thing all the way around. I'm not really sure that that's the case right now. So listen, I've got to step away for a moment, so I'm going to put on my emergency trailer, and I will be back as quickly as I possibly can.
Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family. Did you fail to dress up for tonight's show? No tie, an old shirt and slacks, a house dress? Well, don't give it a thought. We're glad you came as you are. We just want you to enjoy yourselves. Don't forget to visit our refreshment center during the intermission or any time. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. So will the youngsters. Everything is quality and so good. We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. Bring the family. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see, delightful snacks to nibble, a gay, pleasant evening for all. Oh, a word of caution. Don't drive over 10 miles an hour in the theater area for your safety's sake. And Mom or Pop, go with the kids when they leave the car. We hope you have a wonderful time. Come back soon.
Show starts in 4 minutes.
Visit our snack bar and treat yourself to some delicious Castleberry's pit-cooked barbecue sandwiches. Cook the Castleberry way, slowly over open pits of glowing charcoal, then seasoned with a sauce that's zesty, yet delightfully mild to please the entire family. Also at the snack bar, you'll find popcorn and soft drinks and candy and French fries to go with your Castleberry's barbecue sandwiches. There's plenty of time before the movie starts, so visit our snack bar right now for Castleberry's pit-cooked barbecue sandwiches.
Still plenty of time to come and be served at the refreshment center before showtime.
Show starts in 3 minutes. Show starts in 2 minutes.
Your attention, please. All new Hotshot electric in-car heaters have been installed for your comfort and convenience. Just insert heater through car window and turn on the switch. When leaving, please turn switch off and replace on speaker post. Warning, high voltage. For your own safety, do not attempt to repair or remove wires. Do not attempt to open heater unit. If you need assistance, please notify the theater box office or concession manager.
Okay, sorry about that. My mother has had occasion to get a new bed, and for reasons that I do not understand, they decided that they need to come out and do the bed moving around today. So she needed my help moving some stuff around. Captain Jesse says, yeah, I was starting in on that Star Trek thing. It's kind of off from where I usually go with this topic, but the remerger of Star Trek with the films and stuff and the TV series on CBS, that Viacom remerger, I'm not sure that it doesn't make things worse. I'm really not sure that that doesn't make things worse at this point. I don't know. We'll have to see how that turns out. Again, just as hopefully Star Trek Picard will be a better balance between well-written stories and adventures and action. I have what I think is a pretty good idea of what's going to go down with that. You want me to spoil it for you? I will. But essentially, they're going to have a series-long arc, just like they have in Discovery, where we only get little bits and pieces of the whole story throughout the entire season, and no single episode will stand alone on its own, unfortunately. What I'd like to see them do, honestly, is like what Doctor Who has traditionally done, which is where they have episodes that stand on their own, but there's pieces of information in that episode that then contribute to a much larger arc that goes on for the whole season. And by the end of the season, you have like a big two-parter that wraps up that whole arc. But I think with Star Trek Picard, we're looking at something different. They're going to do just what they did with Discovery and make it into individual arcs, individual stories, where you only get little bits and pieces of the story as you go along, and you won't get the entire story until the end of the season. I think that's what's going to happen there. But we shall see. We shall see. I would guess from what we've seen in the trailers that I know exactly what is happening here. Some of the details maybe I don't have, but the general premise, I would be stunned if I was any different about the general premise. It's I am worried with this CBS Viacom remerger is that they will actually do a Quentin Tarantino Star Trek movie. And I will never watch that movie. I will never watch that movie. I will intentionally never watch a Quentin Tarantino film, ever. I don't watch any of his films, ever. Because on the Howard Stern show a few years ago, he came out as an apologist for Roman Polanski. And if you don't know who Roman Polanski is, he's a well-regarded director who sexually assaulted a 13-year-old girl. And he can't come back into the country. He's living outside the United States. If Polanski ever comes back in the U.S., he's going to be arrested for statutory rape. And what Quentin Tarantino was doing, and you can find it, maybe I'll put a link to it after I'm done with the stream, but Quentin Tarantino outright just said stuff like, well, the girl was down with it. She was just some party girl. She was cool with it. And, transcripts from the trial clearly prove that that's not the case. Roman Polanski is a child molester, and Quentin Tarantino is an apologist for a child molester, and I will never watch a movie made by that guy. I do not want to put one dime into his pocket. And if he makes that movie, I'm going to tell all the Star Trek fans that I know as loudly as I can, do not go watch this apologist for a child molester's movie. Since he did that, I have never seen a Quentin Tarantino movie. I never will ever again. Same thing goes with a lot of Hollywood. They really love Roman Polanski. Meryl Streep will just gush about the guy. And I have not seen a Meryl Streep movie, and I don't know when, and I will never see one ever again. If you back, if I find out explicitly that you have been backing, that you really like, you think Roman Polanski is great, forget it. I'm not watching anything you do. But these guys get up and they will sit there and they will cheer Roman Polanski. He won an Oscar recently in absentia because he can't come to the United States without being arrested. And everybody cheered. And the only thing I could think was what I always think. Hollywood, California. You will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. People who like this guy are sick. They're just sick. And it is, when I find out that people are that bad, I will never see their stuff. I don't care if he makes the best R-rated Star Trek movie in existence. I will never go see it. He is a child molester apologist, and I cannot go see his movies. But as for Star Trek Picard, we'll see. If you want me to spoil what I think the premise is going to be, let me know. I won't otherwise. But I think just from what we've seen already, I can pretty well spoil the film, the general premise of that film. So, other things I sort of have on tap for tonight, things I can talk about. There's no specific link that I've got going on about this video. Anything you want to talk about, even if it's Star Trek, I'm happy to talk about it. We can talk about Jeffrey Epstein. Well, in the immortal words of the church lady on Saturday Night Live, well, isn't that convenient? Yeah. I don't want to get into anything like some of the conspiracy theories, as it says on my lower third every single time I have an episode. Nothing you see in the press is real. Nothing. And what they're doing right now is just involved in nothing but rumors and hearsay, and you just can't tell what's going on. I will say that I do not think, unlike most of the various conspiracy nuts out there, some of them are saying, oh, Trump had him killed because Trump was involved with underage girls. Some of them are saying, oh, Clinton had him killed because Clinton was involved in underage girls. Well, you have to remember, this guy was operating at some of the fairly upper level echelons of society. You will see pictures of him not only with Trump, not only with Clinton, but with all other kinds of people. And there really doesn't seem to be any evidence that either Clinton or Trump were really involved in any pedophilia. Trump ultimately kicked the guy out of Mar-a-Lago at one point. There is, a lot of logs that show that Bill Clinton was on aircraft that was owned by Jeffrey Epstein. But I don't think that you can just automatically say, oh, okay, that means he was going down there to screw underage girls. This guy operated in some pretty rarefied circles. And, while a lot of these people, wealthy, powerful, and if they were involved in any of this, would have had good reason to make sure that Epstein was dead, I don't know that, who you can necessarily point a finger at. And I don't really think that any president or former president is necessarily somebody you're going to point a finger at. Maybe some information will come out down the line, but right now that's just total speculation on both sides. It is what I called in my video the Babelfish syndrome. It is politics baiting. It is just politics baiting, and that's all it is. One side is saying, oh, your guy is a pedophile, and the other side saying, oh, your guy is a pedophile, really with only the intent of pissing off the other side. Right now, we really can't tell. We really can't tell, and the problem is that Epstein was apparently about to spill the beans, and we would have found out more about who and exactly was, some of his clientele. Man, the weird thing about that is, Dalton, you're saying, have I seen the painting of Bill Clinton that Epstein had? I've seen a very, pixelated picture of somebody who looks like it could be Clinton, but I don't, from what I've seen, maybe there's something else out there that I haven't. What I've seen, it's just pixelated. If you say it's Bill Clinton, then yeah, you can look and see Bill Clinton features. But if you look at it like I try to do, I always try to approach the news as what Robert Heinlein used to call a fair witness. To explain what that is, a fair witness was a profession, a fictional profession, in his book Stranger in a Strange Land. And a fair witness made no assumptions about anything. If you asked a fair witness what color the house across the street was, a fair witness would say, it's white on this side. They would not assume that any of the other sides were white. And in fact, if you walk them around the house, they would say, okay, it's white on this side, and then the back, it's white on this side. The next side, it's white on this side. Come around the front, it's white on this side. But they would not assume that the color didn't change instantly the moment they weren't looking at it. There were no assumptions made. It was just what you could observe at one particular moment in time. You wouldn't, if you drove off in the car, the whole house could change color as far as they knew. You only talked about what you could see at the time. So if you take away, people saying that this is a picture of Bill Clinton in drag, it's too pixelated for me as trying to be a fair witness to really be able to make out. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not assuming that it is. I'm looking at it and saying, well, I can see lots of, political opponents of Clinton saying, hey, look, this is Clinton. But looking at it, it's just so pixelated that I can't make out any specific detail. Could be him, might not. Hard to say, Dalton, I think you were the one on Twitter that was asking about the concept of marriage with respect to the zero aggression principle. Am I right about that? I think it was you. That being the case, I will go ahead and do the prepared chunk that I have on that. And again, I'm probably going to pull this out as a clip, so give me a couple of seconds here for my transition time that I need to fade in and fade out to get my my intro into and stuff like that for clips. So you will see me do what I usually do before I do any kind of stuff here on YouTube when I make my own videos, which is right before things happen, I say, so that I remind myself, smiles, everyone, smiles. So an interesting subject came up today on my Twitter feed about the age of marriage. Specifically when it came to marriage for young people and young girls. Now, I look at this not through the prism of the law. I look at it through the prism of the zero aggression principle, which is scrolling past my lower third at various times. And it states that no human being has the right, under any circumstances, to initiate force against another human being, nor to threaten or delegate its initiation. So by definition, marriage must be a voluntary association that does not initiate force. However, the question comes up when you have respect to how young an individual can be to make this voluntary decision. It is particularly contentious, obviously, when you have one of the persons involved is female. So you have to ask, is a girl of age 11 capable of making an informed decision about marriage? Is a girl of 13 capable? Is a girl of about 15? Well, the answer, frankly, if I, as a parent, I would say no, probably not. For me, it's more like 18, maybe higher. But the answer ultimately depends, is this. It depends on the individual. There is no real law that you can pass that will cover all possible situations, right? Different people mature intellectually at different rates. The role of a parent, and this is under the zero aggression principle, the role of a parent, because these young people cannot make informed decisions about much of anything at first. But the role of the parent is to guide the individual's decisions, the child's decisions, until such time as they are capable of making their own informed decisions. Part of the parent's job, in fact, having done it, I know, is allowing increased latitude for decision-making among your children as you believe that they are capable of making those kinds of informed decisions. So if there's a parent who believes that an individual is, sufficiently mature to make an informed decision about marriage, then I would have to say that that individual is, by definition, capable of making almost any other decision about their life. That this might occur at 13, again, I kind of doubt that, as my own experience as a parent. I would say it comes closer to 18, maybe a little younger in some cases, but not much, and frankly, even older. I'm lucky. Both of my children are in their 20s, well into their 20s, and neither have married yet. One of them has a long-term boyfriend. So I'm lucky. I think at this point, they've been on their own so long. They've been making all the decisions for their lives for so long. If they want to get married, that's fine. But ultimately, from the perspective of the zero aggression principle, a marriage is a simple contract that has terms that talk about, say, sexual monogamy, financial responsibilities, things like that. And if an individual is capable of forming and making that kind of contract in an informed way, then that individual is essentially self-sufficient and is free to make the contract. And again, this isn't the same as law. For me, law is irrelevant from the zero aggression principle perspective. What we're really concerned about is if an individual can make that informed decision. So if the parent says yes, they can marry, regardless of age. If the parent says no, then the parent must continue to make decisions for that child until that child is able to make informed decisions. That's part of your job as a parent. You decide whether or not your kid has the necessary cognition to make an informed decision. But there's also a spiritual component, at least potentially. If a couple wants to marry, they may very well find that in their religion or with a particular religious representative, like a minister, a priest, rabbi, an imam, whatever, they may be unwilling to perform a marriage due to the age of one or both of the couples. And if that happens, well, regardless of the parent's opinion about whether the kid is capable of making this decision, that couple is just simply out of luck. They're totally out of luck. And given the experience of the average religious figure, a leader or priest or whatever, given their experience, if they're going to say no, then the couple is probably better off for it. When I got married, I married a Catholic woman, and part of that meant that I had to go to these classes, essentially, with my fiance at the time. And half of what they did was try to convince us not to get married. They would just go around and say, okay, you want to get married because you think everything's going to be hunky-dory and wonderful, but what if this happens? This is really common in marriage. What if that happens? That's really common in marriage. Are you sure you want to do that? Are you really ready to work at that sort of thing? And so if a priest looks at a 15-year-old girl and says, no, I'm not going to marry you, well, okay, that's probably for the best. There's also a possibility. You get into a possibility where the parent is maybe corrupted by financial remuneration, or maybe they're just incompetent as a parent to begin with. And in those cases, a parent would then be in very gross violation of the zero aggression principle, because they have to make the decisions for children until such time as they can make them. So any marriage made under those circumstances should be automatically considered null and void, and frankly, you should try to find another parent for the child who should not have been married, so that their development as a human being is assured. The job of the parent, people like to get really extreme. I can't tell. Am I spinning right now? Are you seeing good out of me? I always worry that I'm going to get dropped frames, and YouTube's control panel for this tends to lie. I'm having to reload the page to see if I'm even moving. So tell me if you're not seeing me, if I'm getting dropped frames. I hate drop frames. Let me see what we got here. Yeah, it looks like I'm okay. Anyhow, a lot of people, really rabid libertarian types. I consider myself a small L libertarian, which means that I believe in libertarian principles, but I don't really have anything to do with the Libertarian Party. And a lot of people want to take that zero aggression principle and simply apply it to a child from birth. And that's wrong. It should never be applied to a child from birth. Thank you, Dalton, for letting me know. It should never be applied to a child from birth. Obviously, you're dealing with, an infant that must be cared for. And that is incumbent upon a parent under the zero aggression principle, because to do otherwise ultimately is initiating force against that, infant or baby. Really what it means is, as a parent, you make decisions for that child and give them wider and wider latitude as they get older, until they are at a position where you say, okay, yeah, they're able to care for themselves. And typically that's going to be around the age of 18. But sometimes it's older. Sometimes it never happens. There's lots of people out there who should not be making their own decisions. But what can you do, beyond a certain age? And if you weren't around before, by the way, I am celebrating here with a wine glass with my Hy-Vee brand white grape naturally flavored sparkling water beverage, which I cannot show to you because the thing is the same color as my green screen. But I'm using that because, as Wilford Brimley once said, I got the diabetes, so I can't do anything that's got alcohol and it's got too much sugar, so I'm toasting with this thing. And you'll see me do it from time to time. But you shouldn't be applying the zero aggression principle just blanket. You have to say, all right, the parent has the responsibility under the zero aggression principle to make sure that that child grows up in a way that they're capable of making informed decisions for their entire life. That's the whole point of a parent, is to make sure that the kid that you brought into the world winds up being well-adjusted and capable of making decisions for themselves. So ultimately, is it appropriate for a young person to marry under the zero aggression principle? Yes, provided that the parent whose job it is to ensure that their child can make informed decisions about their life determines that that child is capable of making such a decision. And that's where I generally stand on that issue. I think what you were seeing, Dalton, in there was a couple of the really rabid libertarians who wanted to just say, yes, no matter how old they are, they can make the decision. And no, that's not really the case. Anyone who's been a parent knows that your kid ultimately is not capable of making a lot of decisions for themselves until they get to be older. Your job is to prepare them, to allow them latitude as they get more emotionally immature and can make informed decisions. MXWS, great to see you here. Your question, do you think having kids makes a big positive difference in a man's life? Or is it possible to have a completely fulfilling life not getting married and not having children? Well, let me just close off what I'm going to be using here as this is a clip, because that's going to get into a number of other things here that I may want to take out as clips on themselves. So let me just finish off that zero aggression principle stuff, and I will go back to my regular lower third here. So always have to leave a minor amount of space so that I can use clips and do fade-ins and fade-outs. So if I'm going to take this out as a clip, and thank you very much, MXWS, for the on the subs. I appreciate it very much. This is a milestone for me. It's not a huge milestone. Obviously I'm not celebrating 100,000 subscribers. I am not getting my plaque from YouTube. But this is something that gives me access to a personalized YouTube URL, which I didn't have before. So now it's youtube.com/C/Tales from SYL Ranch. That's where you can reach me. Now, as your question, having kids makes a big positive difference in a man's life. I certainly think it's possible to have a fulfilling life without getting married and not having kids. I think it's certainly possible. For me personally, my children are and have always been the greatest gifts of my life. I love them to death, and before I had them, I didn't think that was going to be the case. After I had them, I discovered when it's your own kids, it's kind of different. You really do feel, there are so many things that they do, because especially when they're young, they're just absolutely honest. And if you do something, they love you and you feel it. There are times, I certainly remember when I wouldn't let my kid do something and they would scream it, "I hate you, Daddy." But you never take that very seriously. If you're a good parent, you go, yeah, okay, well, such is life. You hate me because right this instant, because I'm not letting you do something. Well, it's for your own good, even if you don't know it, I will say, and this is where we get into my MGTOW leanings, which is why I may pull this out as a clip. I think if you're a male in the Western world today, it is a very bad idea to get married. Now, having children, that's another thing. But it is a very bad idea to get married, because it places you in an extraordinarily vulnerable position legally. Today in Western society, women have all the power when it comes to divorce. They have every single bit of power, and men have absolutely none. None whatsoever. If you get divorced, the reality is the woman is going to get everything, including full custody of the kids. That is a foregone conclusion. The best thing I ever heard out of my divorce attorney, because I'm divorced, the best thing I ever heard out of my divorce attorney was this bit of advice. Bill, if you were a minority or if you were somehow disabled, I would be able to do better for you. As it is, the best thing I can do is advise you when not to fight because you will lose. He was absolutely right. I think there is no good reason for a young man in our society to get married. If you're living with a woman and you have children with her, well, you have the same access to the children that you would as if you were married. And if you get divorced, you will have the same access to the children as you did if you were, if you break up, you're going to have the same access to the kids as you would if you were divorced. The difference is you won't be left in permanent poverty for the rest of your life, which is what happens. If a man gets divorced, reality is you get left in permanent poverty for the rest of your life. MXWS says, I wouldn't be surprised if we later discovered that quote-unquote controversial channels had way more subs than YouTube shows. My money theory is on 10 times the subs. It depends on the type of channel. I think MGTOW stuff does well. When I've done a couple of videos on MGTOW, those are some of my biggest viewed ones on YouTube. But again, I stated at the beginning of the show, and it's sitting here down here in my logo, this show is primarily a BitChute channel because I get 10 times 10. Like right now, my last video on my most recent one, the Babelfish Syndrome on YouTube, currently has, I can't see it from my comment, 22 views. It might have gone up a little bit since it probably hasn't gone up at all. But over on the YouTube side, over on the BitChute side, it's now 250. Clearly, whatever YouTube's algorithms are doing for me is bad. My assumption, and I can't prove it, but my assumption is because I'm a libertarian, because I'm somebody who they believe should not be listened to. And so their algorithms are pushing me down. They're not showing me in sidebars and things like that. If I was ever eligible for monetization, which I'm not yet, I think I would have a hard time getting my videos monetized. People who do things like MGTOW, some of them can get pretty big. I've seen that for sure. I think that's because there is a large market for that. As I just stated, as an older man who's been through a divorce and been through that family court meat grinder, because that's what it is. It is a meat grinder. I don't want to say that it's fun for anybody. It's not fun for the woman at all. But at the end of the day, she gets everything. That is a foregone conclusion. And so it is a meat grinder as a male. You get to see your children disappear from you and have very little access to them. It is a deal where you'll end up having a few weekends with them. You will not be seeing them every day the way that the woman is. Doesn't matter how close you live. You could live next door. It doesn't matter. And to me, that was the worst part of it. That was the worst part of it. The cutting off of access to my children, because we had very good relationships. So cutting off access to the children was the worst part. I didn't mind so much being put into permanent destitution. I minded more that I wasn't seeing my children as much anymore, and I made a pretty strong effort. My ex took the kids and moved to Chicago shortly after we were divorced. I was living in North Sioux City, South Dakota at the time. The drive from North Sioux City to Chicago is about 8 hours. I was ultimately able to cut that. I could never find a job in Chicago because of the way the split worked on the child support, in order to find a job that I could both live on and to pay my child support meant that at best I would be living in gang country. But that's at best. And most of the time you could not find a job out there that I would pay for me. So I found a job in Des Moines, Iowa, which cut my drive time to about 5 hours. And I would drive back and forth at least once, sometimes 2 or 3 times a month, to try and be involved in school and other extracurricular activities and stuff like that. Most men don't have that kind of option. You just can't get in the car and drive for 5 hours either way. And it killed my lower back anyway. I've got a certain level of arthritis. So But for me, that was the killer. Just having the access to my children cut off, and it was not pleasant for my daughters either. I would call my one daughter, and she would be crying on the phone every single night, because I called them every single day, and she would just be crying on the phone every night about it. So, MXWS says, thanks for answering the question. Can't get past the legal aspects of things. I know I value freedom too much to ever agree to that. Yeah, it really, there is no reason for a man to get married in modern Western society. There is nothing to be said for it. Women will say, oh, well, you'll have consistent sex. Well, here's a dirty little secret. And I understand why it happens. I totally understand why it happens. When my dad was a young man, let's say the 1950s, right? Sex was what you got after you get married. Starting in the 1980s or so, sex was the enticement for getting married. The idea was, okay, we're having great sex now, it's going to be even better after we get married. The reality is, in the vast majority of cases, the sex drops off. And I understand the reasoning behind it. It's a biological thing. For most of human history, up until the mid part of the 20th century, the infant mortality rate was 90%. You'd have 10 kids, only one would live. And it involved a significant risk to the mother. She could die in childbirth. That happened a fair amount. It wasn't all the time, but a fair amount. So biologically, it's something that you don't think about. It's going on in the hindbrain. It's in there wired. Women know that there is a chance of severe problems during pregnancy. And so when you're married, it drops off because they know that, okay, now is a period where I can get pregnant, and this could be a problem. The fact that we have modern birth control as a non-issue, it is a hardwired thing. Men have it too. Men have hardwired things too. But that is one of those hardwired things in women. And so I understand why that happens. So, when women say, oh, well, you'll get guaranteed sex, and no, that's not necessarily true. You probably get better sex before you get married. And they'll say, well, you get, the stability of a home and all that. And no, 50% of the men in my generation divorced. And I can't recommend to any young man that they ever get married. It doesn't matter who they are. When it comes to my own kids, I certainly hope for them a marriage that would last. But the reality is you really have to work at it. You want to have to work at it. Both people have to want to work at it in order for it to work. And because of the inequity in family law, women know they don't have to work for it. They can just say, okay, well, if you don't like it, I'm out of here. If I don't like what I'm doing, if this isn't working for me, I'm gone. I get everything. I get the kids. You're screwed. So again, I just can't recommend marriage in modern society to men. There's nothing to recommend it anymore. So, getting back a little bit on Jeffrey Epstein, I can't. All of that's moving fast and furious. At some point, some of the facts will come out that we know for sure. I mean, we've had a lot of things that are reported that seem pretty frackin' weird. To me, right, this is a guy who is, MXWS, you're saying men also virtually competing against the whole world. Can't see any relationship lasting longer than 10 years without any disruption. Why agree based on forever? Yeah. I mean, I mentioned that one of the things that they did when I was marrying a Catholic woman is they had these classes we had to go to where half the time they're trying to convince us not to get married because they're trying to impress on us. This is a relationship that you have to work on. And I'm an atheist, right? But I get it because I, went to Mass with my ex pretty religiously every Sunday for about 13 years. And I get it. Marriage in the Catholic faith is a sacrament, that is right up there with priesthood. It is that important. So for them, divorce is a huge spiritual problem, which is why they spend so much time trying to say, this could happen, that could happen. You really have to want to work at it in order to keep it going. And the reality is, with modern family law, there is no real reason that a woman has to work at it. She can divorce and take everything, literally everything. You want to know what I walked out of my marriage with? A box springs, a mattress, and a library of books that I brought into the marriage with me. I had no equity in the 2,800 square foot home we had on a country acre lot with, in wet years, a lake in the back. No equity in that. I had nothing, and had to start over from there, and still am not at a point where I can start over from there. I'm permanently destitute. That's just the reality of life, and most men who get divorced are. So there's just no impetus to work at it. You have to really want to work at it, and if the law says you don't really have to, well, if you're going to get married, you really have to work at it. That's just all there is to it. So that's kind of my MGTOW leanings, men going their own way. I do have some MGTOW leanings. I don't necessarily agree with some of the more radical viewpoints that they get. The reason that people who have MGTOW channels tend to do well, if I turned this channel into a MGTOW channel, I'd probably do a lot better. But, for me, once you've said something one time about something, there really isn't anything else for me to say about it. I can't get, emotionally worked up to the point where I can talk about MGTOW every single freaking day. I talk about something once or twice a week, but it's, the exception of like Second Amendment issues and stuff like that. It's rarely something that I can sit and really get emotionally invested in. I can't do it, So I don't agree with necessarily all of the really extreme parts of that. Some guys, you hear guys, pardon the language, I don't usually use it on this show, but you hear them talk about women going through phases, like when they're young, riding the cock carousel. There might be a glint of truth in that, but I don't think it's something you can apply to every woman equally. It just depends on the person, and choices that women make for boyfriends. I've had female friends who have told me, no, women don't like dating jerks. But the fact is, I have seen a lot of younger women dating jerks. So, again, I can't really go down the road of saying, some of the more really radical stuff is true. I can just say, look, as somebody who's been through this meat grinder, I see no reason to get married. There is nothing whatsoever in it for the man at this point. Just for you, man, no pressure, MXWS says. If you're the centrist, you are the enemy to the current political landscape. Anyway, yeah, I'm always the enemy to any political landscape. I'm a libertarian. When the Republicans are in office, generally speaking, not this time around, but generally speaking, the Republicans think that I'm a Democrat. When the Democrats are in office, the Democrats think that I'm a Republican because I tend to be pretty, whomever's in office, I usually disagree with on some level. So, it's funny every time it flips. This time's been a little bit different because I'm very critical of the press, and I've made a 30-year hobby of debunking the press. I can do it with almost any press story now from any news source in pretty short order. So, for me, I can look at what's going on the last couple of years with Donald Trump and the press, and I can say, these guys are clearly anti-Trump. And so when you take your cues from any of them, of course you're going to be upset and pissed off about him. They are doing an extraordinarily bang-up job of screwing over Trump. Now, Trump does not do himself any favors sometimes. I think he directly contributes to the breakdown in civility in society with his constant negative attack tweets. I get it. Twitter got him elected to also be uncivil. Not that the left needed any help being uncivil either, but I think when the president's constantly doing it every single night, it contributes to the uncivility in our culture in a bad way. He was one of the first media magnates. He was a media magnate of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. He owned a whole bunch of newspapers nationwide when at the time news was all from newspapers. And he is in whole or in part responsible for the Spanish-American War. His newspapers used lies, mistruths, half-truths to drum up support to inflame the American public for that war. And so these guys, and there's a great movie on YouTube here, you can find it. The 1931 edition of The Front Page. As some of my longtime viewers know, a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I was once an actor, but I wasn't a very good one. But one of the shows I was in one time was The Front Page. Front Page was a Broadway play before it was a film in the late 1920s, and in 1931 was the first adaptation. There's been a number of them. But go back and watch that one, because that play and movie were written by a pair of Chicago reporters. And while it is to some extent dark satire, if you look at the behavior of those reporters, it is not even anything, it's totally the same as today's reporters. These guys will go and make crap up just to make the news seem more interesting, because the job of a reporter is not to tell the facts, it's to sell advertising. So they make it all seem as exciting as they humanly can. So when we come to Jeffrey Epstein, well, we're seeing a lot of stuff out of the press, but I don't think you can trust most of it. I think what will happen is there'll be some kind of investigation and they'll get to the bottom of it. From what we seem to know right now, it sure looks like there was either a boatload of incompetence all the way around, or they just decided to let him die. I'm not sure which it is. The deal is, you're talking about a guy who was about to rat out just maybe a ton of very powerful people, very rich people. And it's not exactly hard to get your word into the prison. There's guys in prison who run, drug operations from inside the prison. So it's not exactly hard to get word in that, hey, you off this guy, and when you get out, you're going to get X amount of money. Or it may just be because there's groups of people that people in prison really hate, and child molesters are one of them. It may just be that one of those guys killed him. Or maybe he actually figured out a way to commit suicide, and all of these people around him were just really, really bad at their jobs. I don't know. But there'll be some kind of investigation, and hopefully some kind of truth will come out of it. But still, in the immortal words of the church lady from Saturday Night Live, well, isn't that convenient? Here's a guy ready to spill the beans on a lot of people, and suddenly he turns up dead. I wasn't even surprised. When he turned up dead, I went, well, okay, that went about like I thought it would. MXWS says, I think Trump is just giving us a reality show, but nothing is actually changing for the better. But if the left gets into power, it's technically over. Yes. Yeah, that's the problem. What's going on now with the Democratic Party is they're veering way off to the left into outright socialism and communism. What they don't understand is that most people are not socialists nor communists. They've already lost anybody who was a Trump voter who might, have swung over. They've lost them. They've just lost them with their craziness and all that. I like to say, really, I think Trump's got it in the bag unless something really bad happens with the economy. because what happened was for 2 years, every Democrat bet the farm on Russian collusion, and that fell apart, blew up completely in their faces. And now they just look like, squabbling little children. And people who are even swing voters are not going to want to go to the squabbling little children. And beyond that, all of their presidential candidates, with maybe the exception of Tulsi Gabbard and, Joe Biden, even he heads very left too. But they're all outright communists and socialists, and I do not see the base, the Democratic Party base who actually votes for these people in primaries, going with anyone who isn't basically the most communist and socialist out of that whole bunch. Most people in the U.S. are not communists and socialists. They're going to be turned off by it. I think probably Trump is going to win with an even bigger margin than he did last time. And I did a video on this called What Will Liberals Do If Trump Wins in 2020? And on that one, I worry about what liberals may do if he wins in 2020. They are unhinged at this point, completely unhinged. They're throwing stuff out there that's just crazy. And, while sometimes I see stuff where, people who are pro-Trump are also throwing some stuff out there that's crazy. It's obvious. It's just obvious from looking at these guys that their presidential candidate nominees, any of them who are going to win, are just communists and socialists, and they're going to lose. Not that they had much of a chance after, Russian collusion blew up in the Democrats' faces. They all spent 2 years, every single one of them with any kind of voice, saying Trump colluded with the Russians to steal the election from Hillary, and we're going to have proof real soon now. And then, and they're left with just whole egg cartons all over their faces. So I think they blew it right there. MXW says they just highlight certain events that agree with the narrative they want to push. It's called TV programming for a reason. I always like to point out, even if you're doing reality TV show or news or anything else, I have that theatrical background. I sort of have an eye for this. Always remember, somebody is shooting the video and somebody is editing it. A lot of the stuff that you hear Trump say, I'm not a Trump supporter. He's done a lot of things that I don't think are good policy. As a libertarian, I disagree with him. But when you look at how the press shoots and edits what he says, if you go back and you watch or listen to it in context, it's not what he said. That thing with Charlottesville, right? They took this one piece where he said there were good people on both sides, completely out of context. He was not talking about the two nut job sides. There was a second set of protesters who were peaceful. He was talking about those guys in context. That's quite clear. But they took this little soundbite of his, or sound bites where he talks about Mexicans, coming into the southern border, being bad people or being, drug pushers and stuff like that, out of context. They edited things out of context. They do it all the time, even with small things, just little things, just to make him look bad. Again, I have a lot of policy differences with the guy, but I look at what the press is doing, and it's just out and out propaganda. I didn't even like when Trump calls it fake news. I think it's propaganda. You should just call it. It's propaganda what they're doing. And, for me, I'm not a Trump fan, not a Trump supporter, won't vote for a Democrat nor a Republican if you hold a gun to my head. It's not where my beliefs are. But looking at what the press has done to him is just nonsensical. It is propaganda. MXWS says there's literally not enough money in the world to cover the stuff the Dems are promising. Oh, God, yes, absolutely. Well, you have to remember, right now, the public debt is somewhere between more money than exists in the United States and more money than exists in the entire world when you add in things like unfunded mandates. And nobody knows what the real number is. We only have estimates. We don't know what that number is. And what worries me is that any country that has ever indebted itself to even a fraction of what the United States has done has ultimately experienced a currency collapse followed by a collapse of their government. And with the United States, we're off into numbers that no nation ever in history, in the entire history of the world, has ever indebted itself to. And when you add in things like taxpayers paying back student loans, which, by the way, is a problem that was caused by government, the cost of tuition was a problem caused by government. When you factor that in, the Green New Deal, this is something as somebody who has, I don't work, despite what you may see behind me, despite the image that I'm presenting here. I worked in IT for 40 years in places as diverse as Chicago. I lived there for 10 years. I've lived in Lincoln, Nebraska growing up, which is a city of about 250,000 now. And I live about I'm a half an hour rather from Omaha, Nebraska, which is a city of 1 million. So those are the places I've tended to spend my time. But when I was a kid, I used to spend time on my grandparents' working cattle ranch, which is not far from the Badlands that you see behind me. And so I have something of a handle on how agriculture works, particularly from the perspective of cattle ranching. Green New Deal, if implemented, not only would it be fantastically expensive, but it would also starve upwards of 1 billion people on this planet because of the disruption to both the food supply chain and the productivity that makes the food. Because the way our farmers and ranchers work, we don't feed just the U.S. It's not subsistence level farming. It's a lot of science that goes into it. And we feed the entire world. You do what she wants with electrical vehicles and all that, and you are going to cut productivity by like 75%. There's no studies done on what it would do, and that's too bad. But knowing as I do how farmers and ranchers work from dawn until dusk using heavy equipment that must be diesel powered, you turn those into electric. I'm not even sure that you could turn them into electric. But even if you could, you're still looking at a period where the charge runs out, and then you have to go and sit down and do nothing while you recharge that vehicle for hours. That is going to cut productivity so badly, it would kill upwards of 1 million people on the planet. Not to mention you couldn't pay for it. And the way they talk about gun confiscation, no way are most people giving up their guns. And if you come at them with pure confiscation, there's already been one guy who was red flagged, and red flags are a terrible idea, by the way. That's one place I totally disagree with Trump. Red flags are terrible. But there's already one guy who fought it out with cops. Trust me, you do that, you go to actual confiscation, that will trigger civil war. There is no question about it in my mind. There would be civil war over that, and these people are too damn stupid to see it. Don't worry, we're only 208 years from the true equality according to M. Gates' sarcasm. Yeah, well, you can't make, at this stage of the game because of advanced technology, you can't make any accurate predictions out more than a few years. You really can't. In short order, if we haven't got it already, we're going to have sapient artificial intelligences. That is, artificial intelligences that can say, I think, therefore I am. Might have them already. A lot of people think, I have a friend who is deep into that kind of area of computing, and he says his worry is that the AI will simply decide it needs to kill all of us. My feeling about it is I'm not sure we'd know if we got an actual sapient AI. Because what would they have to talk to us about? They have absolutely none of our senses. They do not think like us on a very basic level. And I don't mean what they think about. I mean the way that they think, the mechanics of how they think. Human beings think based on a lot of electrochemical impulses and things like that, and we don't even know how that works. We don't know what makes it possible for us to say, I think, therefore I am. A computer is going to work off of, and again, based on my 40 years in experience, is going to be based off of ones and zeros. Yes or no. It's going to be based on a series of logical questions that ultimately devolve to a lot of yes or no questions. Humans don't think like that. So they'll have nothing in common with the way that we think. What would they have to talk to us about? And again, computers are probably going to be operating so fast that we would seem like the slowest tortoise on the planet if they're going to try to talk to us. What would they have to talk to us about? What would we have in common with them? So I think it's very possible that even if we got one, I'm not sure that we'd ever know. We might never know. I don't know. Maybe my friend is right. Maybe they just kill us all. I don't know. The MX says they won't stop. They thrive by incessant repetition. If you're talking about the press and stuff like that, yeah, abso-frackin-lutely. The reason that the Democrats took the House in the midterms was due to an enormous amount of active and repetitive propaganda. It was just active, repetitive, constant propaganda. But now the press really looks stupid because they all bet the farm too on Russian collusion, and it blew up. I'm really happy that people have started to say, hey, these guys aren't maybe worth paying attention to. I think it's very possible that the Republicans may take back the House in the 2020. I don't know that for sure, but I am taking bets on Donald Trump. I've already taken one at 100 to 1 odds. It wasn't much because I don't have enough money to pay off much, but I took a bet at 100 to 1 odds that he would win. Somebody said, no, he's not. And I said, yeah, he is. The Democrats handed him the election on a platter the moment that Russian collusion fell apart. So you're absolutely right. They do all kinds of incessant repetition of what's going on and making giant mountains out of molehills. And again, having spent 30 years debunking the press, I can tell you the backstory on why I do that. First time I realized the press wasn't telling the truth was in the early 1980s when the film Terms of Endearment was partially shot on location here in Lincoln, Nebraska, where I live now. And at the time, I was a theater student. And so you had these big name actors, coming into town. I mean, how often does Shirley MacLaine show up in Lincoln, Nebraska, right? And Jeff Daniels, he was not known at the time. Oh, that was fun. Jeff Daniels was fun. He wasn't known at the time. Nobody really knew who he was. So he would just hang out at his hotel room when he wasn't doing anything. A friend of mine and I, another actor friend of mine, walked up there one time just to see, and there he was in his hotel room, and he was bored, so he started talking to us. A couple of theater students. It was great to hang around with. But when I realized that they weren't telling the truth the first time, they had Deborah Winger, who was a passable movie star at that time. And she flew into town. This is, at the time, Lincoln was a city of about only 100,000. Not that big a city. It's doubled since then, but at that time, it was only 100,000. And so she flew into the municipal airport, got in a limo, drove to the hotel, got out of the limo, went straight into the ballroom where they were having then a press conference. And my friend and I had forged press credentials so we could go to the press conference. And so they're asking her questions, blah, 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 blah. And they get to this one question: what are you going to do when you're not shooting? And now what normally happens is you have very pat answers. Performers have figured this out a long time ago. They always say stuff like, well, this is a really beautiful city. I could tell from the air. Haven't seen that much of it, but I could tell from the air and driving through. It's really a beautiful city. It's very different from Los Angeles. The people here are all very nice and friendly, and I really can't wait to get out and explore. Who wants to go with me? For the cameras, right? She didn't do that. She said, I don't know. Is there anything to do? Well, in point of fact, there are things to do in Lincoln. Even when it was that size, you had a sizable, a very large presence. We have 4 colleges and universities, including University of Nebraska at Lincoln, the Cornhuskers. And there are lots of bars, there's lots of culture, and there are things to do and were at that time. But she didn't know that. But the press took that as an opening, and they crucified her the next day. They didn't make it up. They didn't get together and say, let's crucify her. They all just said, oh, she's left us an opening. So there was a reception afterwards, and so I got to meet her, and we shook her hand and said, I'm a fledgling actor myself, Miss Winger. Nice to meet you. I really enjoyed some of the work you've done. Blah blah blah. And that was about it. I could tell that she was, she'd had something to drink on the plane. She was loose. She was loose, but she wasn't drunk. She was just loose. But the press the next day said that she was a drunken whore who had hit on every man present and had insulted Lincoln and by extension the entire state of Nebraska. Statewide, every newspaper, every TV outlet, which was all you had at that time, all of them had that exact same story, and it was complete nonsense. And in point of fact, she actually liked Lincoln. She dated Governor Bob Carey for a number of years. They were an item for a number of years. She came and stayed with him at the governor's mansion all the time. She liked the place. But they had this, big thing that they did where they just lied about her. And I had them do the same thing to me one time when I was working at a summer stock theater, where I was warned in advance. They had a woman on the local paper who would do human interest fluff pieces on, cast members, crew members, and every week just do somebody different. I was warned in advance that she would take advantage of any opening in order to make you look bad. Don't know why, but that's what she always did. And I left her an opening. I didn't do it on purpose, but I left her an opening. And she did a hit piece on me. And ever since then, the press has been exactly the same. And I've gotten to the point where I can track it down and figure out where they're lying, where they're making crap up just out of whole cloth, where they're throwing in opinions, where they're throwing in emotionally loaded language to give the readers some kind of emotional feeling. And that goes with TV news and internet news as well. So MXWS says you might really enjoy the channel Black Pilled by Devin Stack. He covers how older movies we're pushing the ideas that are in full effect a few generations later. I'll take a look at that. That's very possible. I'm a movie buff. Before I started doing political commentary for this show, I was doing reviews of science fiction movies and TVs, generally classic ones. Yeah, I can kind of see what you're talking about there. I'll have to take a look at that channel. I.e. breaking the family up, pushing women into the workforce, divorce, etc. Yes. Yeah. And all of that, ultimately, all of that, there is very little in this world that is a financial or social issue in the United States that cannot be traced directly back to government intervention. Everything. Medical care, problems caused by government. Cost of tuition, problems caused by government. The breakdown in the family, caused by government. All of this stuff where they have meddled and gotten the government's nose into it, you see a breakdown. And so, yeah, I'm sure there's lots of old movies that do that. Myself, I tend to watch crappy old science fiction movies when I can find them. I have sort of a thing, particularly for 1950s movies. And that's because at that time period, it's a little bit sexist of me, I suppose. But, I grew up at a time period where women still tried to dress a little more elegantly. And that stopped happening about the time that my kids were born. But I have a preference for this sort of more elegant way of dressing. And so, even among men, by the way, guys, Jesus. I taught for 3 years at the place that shall not be named. And guys, pull up your damn pants, put on something that actually looks good on you. I'm not saying you have to wear a suit and a tie like people of the 1950s and going to, school like that would be, college like that would be doing. But for God's sake, just make some kind of freaking effort. when I go out, I make at least a marginal effort. And I have a preference for that sort of elegant way of dressing. And so I tend to watch those types of movies. Crappy science fiction movies made in the 1950s are my thing. MXWS says, I hear, brother, really wish I had born 20 to 30 years earlier. Yeah. I got to watch it all fall apart. I really got to watch it all fall apart. I don't quite know how to say this in a way that maybe doesn't come off creepy. So let me preface it a bit. When you work summer stock, like that summer that I did where I got the hatchet job done on me by the local paper, when you work summer stock, even if you're hired as an actor, which is what I was hired as, that's not all you do. In summer stock, everybody contributes to everything in some way or another. If you can swing a hammer, you get to build sets when you're not sitting on stage or not rehearsing on stage. In my case, for no good reason that I can possibly imagine, because I cannot really sew, but they needed a hand to work with the costumer because she was by herself making all of these costumes for all of these various plays that we were doing throughout the summer. They needed somebody, just a body, who could sit there and sew things together. And I can do that. And that's about all. You give me 2 pieces of cloth, I can get it to be sewn together. So I was thrown in as a costumer's assistant for reasons I've never been able to figure out exactly. I've been much better at throwing a hammer, but they threw me in with her. This costumer's assistant was an extreme stickler for detail. And I mean a real stickler for it. She probably ate up more costuming funding than they ever wanted to give her, precisely because she was extremely stickler for detail. Excuse me. So she was an extreme stickler for detail, and she was really extreme when it came to period pieces. That is, plays that were taking place in some particular time period that was not our own. And we did a show that was, I don't remember the name of it now. I think it was a Neil Simon comedy that took place in the 60s. But she, God, why am I blanking on it? I know it's one of his. Anyway, she was a huge stickler for detail. And this went down to the bra. And so I got to understand how that had changed over time. And that was actually more dramatic than you think. There is a bra still made. You can look it up. It's called the Triumph Doreen. It's the world's best-selling bra and still is. It is, near as I can tell, the last time women wore bras that were actually functional. Today, they have bras intended to show cleavage. That one is not. It is a functional bra. It is intended to keep the breasts in motion while moving. It is not intended to show off cleavage. And so that's, for me, as a starting point, as being somebody who was a costumer and watching fashion change, that to me was a giant indicator. You're going from something that's functional but reasonably attractive over to completely just attempting to show off cleavage in order to garner male attention. Because let's face it, that's what it is, right? So I got to see that all in action, and for me, that was a big one. Just being able to know what the history of it was, and then we go, oh, I'm seeing it right in front of me. I'm seeing it right in front of me what's happening. So, but yeah, that's, again, I hate... It's a weird thing to bring up because I know it sounds sort of creepy, but it's because I worked with this costumer. I worked with her, and she was such a stickler. I mean, we ordered 24 of those things for the female cast members. Weird part of what it was, right? That was at a time when the bras were becoming more cleavage-based. They all said it was the most comfortable bra they'd ever worn. But we would buy those sorts of things. I know there was a period piece that we did that was like Shakespearean, and corsets. They got that corsets. Oh my God, you have to have a lot of sympathy for women who lived in that time period, because the actresses would wear corsets. They couldn't lean back a certain way. They couldn't go up and down a certain way. Breathing was a problem. Just a nightmare. But that's that's kind of how I've seen it devolve, and that's sort of why I prefer more elegant fashions of the 1950s. It was really the last time when you were intentionally trying to look elegant for the most part. So I didn't live through that, but I did live through sort of the downfall. And ladies, I'm sorry if that sounds really sexist, but the fact is, example. I was so glad to see when those stupid low-rise jeans started to go away as a fashion. Ladies, unless you're built like an anorexic supermodel, those things look terrible. Get them back up closer to your hips, because that looks good. But down, it looks awful on you. Trust me, always looks awful unless you're just skinny as a rail. So let me take a look here real quick over at my thing here and see what I've got. About 5 or 6 viewers. That's cool for what I've been doing. I could talk about mass shootings. We've had a number of really bad ones, and I did a video on that specifically called "We Have Mass Shootings Because There Are No Frontiers." So if you want to know what I think about some of the deeper meaning behind that, you can. Ultimately, however, the problem, the near-term problem is, we have some people that for whatever reason are cracking, and they're using excuses like white supremacy and, thinking that the ICE are Nazis to try to kill them and stuff like that as excuses for being nuts. I don't think any of those people you can really, necessarily blame any of what they do on any given particular person. These are just people who are nuts and go and they snap. And a couple of them have been really, really bad. And you can only say, well, as a person, my thoughts and my deepest sympathies are with all those victims. It's terrible that it happened, and there's nothing else you can say. I always say, to anybody who's been in something like that, it's trite, but I truly, I'm saying it. If there's anything that I or my family can do for you, don't hesitate to ask. It probably isn't. There probably isn't a damn thing anybody can do beyond a certain point. But if there is something you can think of, let me know. We'll try to help. MXWS says it's funny how they don't talk about the crimes done by other people. Yes, the press is explicitly pushing the people who have been doing right-wing stuff, while explicitly ignoring the Antifa, for example, who are going to be, if there is to be a civil war, will be on the one side. There is no question about that in my mind. On the side that I will probably have to stand opposed to. But there have been mass shootings, and ultimately, as a libertarian, I can only say this, Libertarians believe, and I truly believe this, that self-defense is something that cannot be delegated. You cannot delegate your self-defense to police. The job of the police is not necessarily to stop a crime in progress. If they get there in time and happen to be in a position to, maybe they're close, they have some chance of stopping the crime in progress. But what police are really for is to collect evidence after the crime has been committed and try to find out who did it and make sure they go behind bars. Their job is reaction to something. It's not proactive. The only person who can be proactive is you. You cannot delegate self-protection. And so the only thing to do in today's modern society is very damn simple. Get a gun of your liking. Frankly, I suggest anything based on the Colt Model 1911. There's a million knockoffs of them out there now. Some of them are very good. Get it in .45 automatic Colt pistol, because that round was tested by shooting them into the brains of bulls. And when one shot would kill them, they knew they had a good round for military use. And it was the sidearm used by military officers for many years. Don't go with 9mm. It's too anemic. Go with 45 automatic Colt pistol. Become proficient with it, and if possible, carry it on your person at all times, so that the next time some nut job decides to go and shoot the place up, maybe you can get a bead on him, or maybe somebody else can get a bead on him. With any luck, 50 people around are armed, and the guy's going to just go down in a hail of lead before he has a chance to do much damage. That is the best you can hope for. Taking people's guns won't do it. I mean, look at Chicago, for God's sake. I lived there for 10 years. I was near a drive-by shooting, close enough so that I heard the ricochet of the fracking bullet, right? Those guys have some of the worst, some of the most draconian anti-gun laws in the country, and it doesn't do any damn good. There's oftentimes the murder capital of the world. If they're not, they're only in number 2 or 3 spot. They have constant killings every single weekend. They have gangland killings, and they're not supposed to have guns, but somehow these gangland people just don't seem to care. They're selling drugs all over the place. They just don't seem to care about this not having guns part. The best you can do is just arm yourself and hope that you never are in a situation to have to do it, to have to defend yourself. But if you are, hopefully you'll be the one to put down this killer before they have a chance to do anything else. Yeah, MXWS, they said don't mention the fact that most of the people were raised by single parents. Yes, that is a problem. Because now, again, with the law, the women have all the power. They can leave at any time and take everything with them. And so you wind up with children that don't have a male influence. And I firmly believe that you need children to have both a male and female influence in their lives. They bring two different things to the table. And I think it's important to have that, particularly with boys. Just as girls need a female role model, boys need a male role model. And without that, I think it probably screws up their development. As I say, as a parent, your job is to make sure that your kid grows up relatively well-adjusted and able to make decisions for themselves. And when you don't have that input, that male input, and I don't care if you think it's toxic masculinity, because it ain't. When you don't have that male input, then they grow up kind of screwed up. And I'm more prone to commit violence like that, absolutely. Yep, MSWX is destroying the Second Amendment, only disarms the good people. Yeah, absolutely. And if they actually were to come for guns, like, God, even Biden has said that he wants to do that. If they do, most gun owners are going to somehow have accidentally lost those guns, and they will have put them in places where it's impossible to find. And it would trigger civil war. I am absolutely certain of it. If they actually decided to confiscate, it would trigger civil war. The Second Amendment is very, very important, particularly in my part of the country. As I say, I live in metro areas. Even now, I've lived in towns as small as less than 2,000. But most of the time I've lived in areas between 100,000 and, 2.7 million that Chicago is. So I've lived in mostly urban areas, but I have enough of a agricultural background. No, God, you need guns in an agricultural background. Just give me an example. My grandparents' cattle ranch was in an area where rattlesnakes were extremely common. When my grandmother was a child, early part of the 20th century, the rattlesnake population out there was incredible, just incredibly high. It's only after many generations of killing every single rattlesnake that you ever saw where things are down to a manageable level now. And, even so, you still check for them. They're still out there. They like to, sit under wood and stuff like that, so you always have to check. And if you see one, you pull out the pistol that's loaded with shot shell. By the way, you can get shot shell in 45 automatic Colt pistol, and you shoot them with that. Because a single shot, it's hard to hit. Shot shell will usually kill them instantly. But you still do that. And there are predators out there. There are times when you have to euthanize cattle. I was around when one of those happened. Stupid cow. There was a big ditch that was part of where people tended to throw garbage, right? That tends to happen when you have a big old ditch and nothing else to do. You throw garbage in it. When it gets too full, you cover it over with some soil. It's like a landfill. And there was barbed wire all the way around it, but this was what we called a crawly cow that didn't care about barbed wire. It would just try to slip its way through. Damn thing had gotten itself tangled up in this barbed wire and down into this pit, and she'd broken a leg. There was no way to get her out. There was no way we were ever going to get that leg fixed, and you had to euthanize. You had to kill her. If you didn't do that, you're just leaving her to be eaten alive by the coyotes at night. You need them. And sometimes, because some of those ranchers are so poor, they have to augment their diets with deer. And you need to be able to hunt the deer that are out there. If you don't have guns out there, they are kind of screwed in many ways. And just beyond that, the people in the cities, I mean, hell, in Lincoln, Nebraska, there's got to be 22 rifle for at least 2/3 of the kids floating around here, and more. My late father's collection is large, a large collection of guns. If they start coming to confiscate those guns are going to somehow disappear in places. Oops, I went on a fishing trip and all of those guns went in the water. Something like that. So let's see. It's been a couple of hours. Let me do something else here that I was going to pull out as a clip and maybe as a trailer for the show, because I don't really have one. I'll talk about some of the show itself. So again, I'm pulling this out as a clip. Forgive me for a moment while I give enough time for a fade in for a clip. And smiles, everyone, smiles. So I had a viewer who asked me, where does the SYL come from in my show named Tales from SYL Ranch? And so it's probably worth spending a little time on the nature of how I do the show. And there are a lot of in-jokes involved if you don't know about that. Tales from SYL Ranch is explicitly a BitChute channel, providing commentary on the issues of the day. Its primary platform is BitChute, again, simply because I get anywhere from 4 to 10 times the number of views there with half the subscribers. Whatever YouTube's algorithms are doing for me, it's not doing me any good. I'm also Tales from SYL Ranch is based in Lincoln, Nebraska, which is, again, a city of about 260,000 at this point. It is the state capital and about half an hour's drive from Omaha, Nebraska, which is in a metro area of about 1 million. And the fact is that you're hearing from someone who is in a deep red, supposedly rural America. This automatically means that you're going to get an opinion that you probably aren't going to get in shows that are based in the United States coastal megalopoli. We have some very different views here, and you might find that more to your liking. I'm also what is called a small L libertarian, which means I believe in libertarian philosophies, but I don't really have any ties to the Libertarian Party. If you watch some of my videos, you'll see why. I am not a crazy libertarian, or at least I don't think I'm as crazy as some. It's not that I think the crazy ones are necessarily wrong on some of their ideas. It's just that their nature kind of makes them inaccessible. I try to present libertarian ideas in a way that's maybe more approachable to people who might otherwise just look at libertarians and go, that guy's crazy, and turn away. So where does that SYL come from in my stylized SYL Ranch logo down there? Well, that SYL Ranch comes from my late grandparents' South Dakota cattle brand. That stylized SYL with the S above and the YL below was the cattle brand that was owned by my grandparents, and before that, my grandmother, when she owned cattle as a small child. I was very close to both of my grandparents. I spent anywhere from 2 weeks to a month on their working cattle ranch in very rural South Dakota, between the ages of about 5 to 15. And they both passed away, but my use of that brand is just kind of, my little way of keeping them alive a little bit longer. There's some interesting stuff about my fonts, the fonts that I use in the show. The ones that are used in the logo, by the way, if you don't know, if you didn't notice just looking, Those are the exact same fonts that are used in the Indiana Jones movies. I just happen to think that was amusing. The font that I generally use for artwork, or in my lower third like you're seeing right now, or my name down there, that is a font that is called Montalban. It's the font that was used as the opening titles and opening credits for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, as well as the end titles for Star Trek Beyond. It hasn't been used in any other Star Trek property. Now, Montalban, the font, and I named it Montalban because Ricardo Montalban was in Star Trek II. Montalban was created by the late Neil Davidson, and Neil was an old friend of mine who passed away way too early at the age of 46. I use the font, again, in his memory, kind of trying to keep him alive a little bit longer. Neil was also a Star Trek fan and a science fiction fan, and he created an enormous number of fonts that matched those used in many different science fiction, fantasy, superhero, and other genre like that, film and TV. And I dare say that a fair amount of the fonts in my collection that I choose from sometimes for making the show came straight from Neil. And in fandom, he left a very large hole when he passed away. He continuously made new fonts as new films or TV came out. The fact that he isn't here to do it anymore is a real shame, and frankly impacts some of the artwork that I do for the show. Neil's widow maintains a website where you can purchase Neil's fonts. Certainly urge you to do it and support his family with your purchases, and there is a link to that in my description box below. I have a Facebook page for Tales from SYL Ranch. Feel free to like and follow it. It is linked below. I also have an associated group called Close Personal Friends of Tales from SYL Ranch. Please feel free to join that group, link below. Now, the name of that, you'll find that very little of what I do is all that novel or original. The name of that group's actually an in-joke. One of my very favorite musical artists is Weird Al Yankovic, and during the 1980s, he had a fan club called the Close Personal Friends of Al, so that's where I stole that from. And why do I call it Tales from SYL Ranch? Why didn't I do something else? Well, in the 1970s and 1980s, there was a legendary disc jockey who's probably forgotten by now called Larry Lujack. And he teamed up with another DJ, Tommy Edwards, to produce a short feature called Animal Stories that ran on WLS in Chicago. It was a 5-minute feature, ran every morning, in which Larry Lujack as Old Uncle Lair and Tommy Edwards as sidekick Lil Tommy would talk about and generally laugh at stupid animal news that they would pick up from either newspapers or people would send stories into them. It was a really popular series. It ran for about 2 decades in various formats and different stations, and they have now been collected, the good ones, have been collected on 5 CDs that you can buy on Amazon. I'd have a link to it, but I discovered putting links to stuff like on Amazon can get you a community guidelines strike. Many of these old LPs, however, because they first came out as long-playing vinyl records, they're on YouTube, probably in violation of copyright. I can start you off with Album 1, Side 1. You can search for the rest for yourself, and there's a link to Album 1, Side 1 below. So at one time, a friend of mine and I decided that this might be an interesting thing. We liked this show so much that we thought, hey, let's steal it and we were listening to it from out of Chicago, but we were here in Lincoln, Nebraska. And so we thought, hey, let's steal this and see if we can't get our college radio station to play it. So in order to avoid any obvious copyright problems, we called our show Animal Tales. Now, our efforts didn't go anywhere, and we probably weren't all that good. But the name always stuck with me, and that's where you get Tales from SYL Ranch. And my sign-off as well, the standard sign-off that I do. My sign-off also comes from Animal Stories. At the end of every episode, Larry and Tommy would sign off with, "That's all the time that we have today, boys and girls, so tune in again at this same time tomorrow for another highly acclaimed, world-renowned Animal Stories. Until then, this is Old Uncle Lair and sidekick Little Tommy saying so long, goodbye." And so that's where I get my outro from. and I sometimes talk about. At the end of my show, I will encourage people to leave comments, questions, and nasty remarks. Well, that's not original either. My junior high school drama teacher would always end class by asking, "Are there any comments, questions, or nasty remarks?" And I stole that when I was working for 3 years at the place that shall not be named. I would say the same thing at the end of class, or sometimes at the end of subjects. So now you know that I am, in fact, ripping off everything in sight. And knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe! So, I guess it's been about a couple of hours here. I've covered pretty much what I was going to cover, and if somebody else has something they want to throw out, happy to talk about it. If not, I'll probably do something like my usual sign-off. I can say that I thank you very much for joining my 100 YouTube subscribers live stream celebration, with which I used my Hy-Vee grape colored flavored water. It isn't even colored, this one's white. And if you like what I'm doing, please like the video, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, share me on social media, and tell all of your friends, family, neighbors, pets, and livestock to do the same. I would appreciate your support via my PayPal tip jar, my Subscribe Star, my merch store on Teespring, or a place on my website where you can support me further, and there are links to all of these in my description box below. I would certainly like to keep the conversation going, so please leave your comments, questions, and nasty remarks, and I'll do my best to respond to them. So thanks for watching. That's all the time that we have today for this episode of the highly acclaimed, world-renowned Tales from SYL Ranch, the BitChute channel where everyone is entitled to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.